Today we will discuss how to manage when you are given a particular case scenario. And today we will discuss a case scenario about a normal pregnancy. The case scenario given is a 23-year-old primigravida, gestation age 39 weeks. On examination, BP was 110/70, pulse rate 88 per minute. Abdominal examination shows a full-term uterus, cephalic presentation, and fetal heart rate 134 per minute. How will you manage this woman? One thing you have to remember is, even though there is no abnormality given, you have to take a history and ensure that there is no high risk factor for this woman. The idea of taking a detailed history in an antenatal woman is to identify any risk factor which may adversely affect her pregnancy and labor. Also, we have to ensure that her dates are correct or not. Only if the dates are correct, we can decide whether it is a small 4-day gestation, intrauterine growth retardation, or a larger baby, or any abnormality regarding the pregnancy. Also, whether to decide whether she needs any early termination of pregnancy or not. Apart from asking for any history of hyperemesis, bleeding PV, any history of drug intake, history of exposure, exanthematous fever, etc. I stress the important points to be mentioned in the first trimester. So first we have to ask, when was the first visit? Did she has a dating scan? And if yes, whether it is normal or not, and whether there is any discrepancy between her LMB calculated by the scan and by calculated from her LMB, and she will be able to say whether it is there or not. And if it is corresponding, we can assume the dates are correct. And we have to also ask for, was she evaluated for diabetes, hypertension, thyroid disorders in the first visit? If she is not, we may not be knowing if she developed diabetes later on, whether it is she is an overt diabetic or chronic hypertensive or not. So that history is important. And again, you have to ensure whether she is on any medication prior to or during the pregnancy. So again, you have to ask, when was the first visit? If her first visit was in the second trimester, all these things may lose relevance. So you have to ensure when was the first visit. If it is before 12 weeks, then her dating scan may be correct. If there is no diabetes, hypertension, then if she develops hypertension further during pregnancy, we can assume it may be gestational diabetes. And again, any medication, if it is present, you have to see whether it will be adversely affecting the pregnancy or not. In the history of second trimester, ensure whether she is having regular antenatal visits, whether she had done an anomaly scan, and if done, whether it is normal or abnormal, whether she had done a glucose tolerance test at or after 24 weeks, if yes, whether it is normal or not, and care about detecting any increase in the blood pressure, any history of bleeding per vaginum, and whether she had taken iron and calcium regularly, and also whether she was immunized or not. In the third trimester, again, history of blood pressure, bleeding, and detecting blood sugar, whether a third trimester scan was done, and if yes, whether it is normal or not. And in a patient without any regular antenatal visits, you cannot expect all these things to be detected. Remember, if there is a complaint, you have to elaborate on the history of the presenting complaint. Then only you go to the history of present pregnancy. After the history of present obstetric history, we go to the past obstetric history, where you have to ask for the details of each pregnancy. The antenatal period, intrapartum period, and the postpartum period. In the antenatal period, whether there is any complications like hypertension, diabetes, bleeding per vaginum, convulsion, etc. And in the intrapartum period, whether it's a prolonged labor, is it a normal delivery, instrumental delivery, operative delivery. And if it is an operative delivery or instrumental delivery, what was the indication? And in the about the baby, whether what is the weight, whether it is cried soon after birth, and what about the milestones of the baby, whether it is normal or not, and how is the baby now. If there is any history of abnormal or bad obstetric history, like a recurrent abortion, second trimester abortion, preterm labor, intrauterine death, stillbirth, you have to be careful, because all these may affect the present pregnancy adversely, what we call as the bad obstetric history. Neonatal death or admission in the neonatal unit immediately after delivery is again comes under bad obstetric history. In the postpartum period, whether she had developed any complication, and like fever, any readmission, any resuturing if it is an operative delivery, all these are important in the postpartum period. Regarding the menstrual history, whether it is a regular cycle or not, and what is the duration of the cycle. If she is having a 28-day cycle, then only our Nagalese rule will be correct. If it is she is having a 30-day or a 35-day cycle, we have to give allowance to the affected date according to the duration of the cycle. And regarding marital history, whether there is any period of infertility, and whether she had taken any drugs for or treatment for infertility, and whether it is a consanguineous marriage or not. Past medical and surgical history, whether there is any chronic illness like a chronic renal disease, heart disease, any medical disorder, and any history of any surgery. Personal history regarding her bowel habits, any addictions, drug history, any allergic to drugs, or whether she is taking any drugs before or during pregnancy for any other indication. And family history, again you have to talk about whether any history of genetic disease running in the family, any history of diabetes, hypertension, and any history of mental disorders in the mental retardation in the family. Then comes the socio-economic history, which will tell you whether she is in the low socio-economic strata, middle class family, upper, etc., depending upon her occupation, her spouse occupation, and the family surrounding. Coming to the examination, all of you know it comprises general examination, examination of the system, and obstetric examination. In general examination, apart from noticing whether there is any pallor, clubbing, jaundice, cyanosis, edema, etc., in obstetrics, you have to specifically look for the height to know whether the woman is short-statured or not, to know not the weight and calculate the BMI, to know whether it is underweight overweight or obese. You have to look for the gait of the woman, which will tell you about any abnormality of the pelvis. Of course, don't forget to look for any abnormality in the pulse rate and record the blood pressure. Examination of the system, especially the respiratory system and cardiovascular system, should be looked for any chronic illness of the respiratory system or any heart disease. Coming to the obstetric examination, it includes inspection, palpation and auscultation. I am going about the palpation. The first thing you do is to measure the fundal height and measure the symphysiofundal height, and you have to see whether it is corresponding to the gestational age that we call as appropriate for gestational age, or which is less than or more than expected. If it is less than, you should suspect IUGR, small for date or wrong date or oligamenous, etc. If it is greater, you have to maybe a big baby, multiple pregnancy, hydramnios or tumor complicating. One thing you have to remember is at term there may be falling forward, the flanks may be full, and in an abnormal lie like a transverse lie also the fundal height may be less. So here when the fundal height is less, you have to look for the or more. You have to again measure the umbilical girth also. It should be between 90 to 100 centimeter. If it is less than 90, you should suspect on the IUGR, or more than you should expect as in a fundal height is more. Now coming to the obstetric grip, the idea of obstetric grip is to know the lie, presentation, position and attitude. It will also tell you whether the head is engaged or not. So the lie, for the lie you have to do the both fundal grip and the first pelvic grip. If both, you got some fetal pole. It may be either the podalic pole or maybe the cephalic pole. In either of them, then it is a longitudinal lie. If you don't get anything in the fundus or in the first pelvic grip, then you should suspect a transverse lie. Coming to the presentation, the first pelvic grip will tell you whether it is a cephalic presentation or a breech presentation. You get a globular mass, hard and palatable, then you can assume it is a cephalic presentation. In a breech presentation, you get a soft, boggy, broad mass, which is non-palatable. Now coming to the position, the umbilical grip will tell you whether what is the position of the fetus. Remember, position is defined by the position of the occiput with respect to the pelvis, and the occiput is on the side of the back. So by locating the back of the baby, you can determine the position, and the back is detected by the feeling of, during the umbilical grip, by a feeling of uniform curved resistance, and you have to look for whether it is felt near to the midline or in the flanks, and whether it is on the right side or on the left side. So if it is a posterior position, the back may be felt in the flank, and if in an anterior position, the back may be close to the midline. Depending on whether it is on the right side, it may be right occipito anterior or right occipito posterior, and if it is on the left side, you can say it is a left occipito anterior or left occipito posterior, depending upon the back whether it is close to the flanks or close to the midline. Now coming to the attitude, the second pelvic grip will tell you whether the attitude of the fetus, and it will also tell you whether the head is engaged or not. It will also confirm the findings of the first pelvic grip. And in second pelvic grip, you are looking for the position of the occiput and the sinciput. And remember, occiput is always on the side of the back. So, and if the occiput is at a lower level compared to the sinciput, then it is a well-fleshed head and the presenting part is vertex. If the sinciput and occiput are located at the same level, then you should suspect a deep-fleshed head and it can be a brow presentation. If the occiput is at a higher level than the sinciput, it is an extended head and the presenting part will be face. Now you have to say whether the head is engaged or not. In the second pelvic dip, if you get only the sinciput, then you can say, or no part of the fetal head, then you can say it is an engaged head. If you get both the sinciput and the occiput, the head is unengaged. So remember, whether this is engaged or not is determined by the second pelvic dip, depending upon whether you are able to palpate occiput and sinciput both or only one pole. After the examination, after the history taking and examination, now we are in a position to know what are the risk factors this patient has. Any medical disorder like anemia, hypertension, diabetes, chronic lung disease, heart disease, renal disease, or any other medical disorder if present, is the patient is considered as a risk factor. Any history of obstetric complications like recurrent abortion, second trimester abortion, intrauterine death, stillbirth, any difficult vaginal delivery leading to neonatal death and neonatal admission. All these are considered to be obstetric risk factor for the next pregnancy. If the age of the mother is more than 35 years, if she is getting pregnant for the first time, she is considered as an elderly prime. If the height of the woman is less than 145 centimeter, she is considered to be short stature, and a short stature woman may have a small pelvis. So you should think of a CPD, even though they may have a small baby. And the BMI, if the BMI is less than 18.5, she is considered to be underweight, and if it is more than 22.9, she is considered to be overweight, and above 25 is considered to be obese. Then this BMI calculation is a little bit different for Asian women. This is for classification for Asian women according to Indian GDM guidelines. Then if there is an abnormal line like a transverse line, oblique line, any presentation other than cephalic, vertex presenting part is vertex, then it is considered to be a high risk pregnancy. Any history of antepartum hemorrhage and premature rupture of membranes also considered to be a risk factor. Risk factor means anything which will adversely affect the prognosis of the mother and the fetus and considered to be causing more morbidity and mortality to the mother and fetus. So if any woman has these risk factors, she is considered to be a high risk, and without any risk factor we call it as a low risk. A woman having a cesarean section in the previous pregnancy or now having multiple pregnancy is also included in the high risk pregnancy. Coming to our case scenario where she is a primate with on examination if we haven't found any risk factor, and on examination the size of the fetus is appropriate for gestational age, still there can be late onset IUGR, so you have to do ultrasound examination if it is not done after 34 weeks. This will rule out any late onset intrauterine growth retardation, any oligoamnios. It will tell you the placental location and confirm the presentation. And if it is, the ultrasound is also normal, she is considered to be low risk. Now, as a woman is 39 weeks, we have to decide on how to deliver her, whether it is a vaginal delivery or a cesarean delivery. For this, we have to do a vaginal examination. The purpose of a vaginal examination is to assess the cervix, assess the pelvis, and to rule out CPD. So, after doing a vaginal examination, you have to, if the pelvis is contracted, that's an indication for elective cesarean section. And also, when there is a major degree cephalopelvic disproportion, again it is an indication for cesarean section. If there is no major degree CPD and the pelvis is normal, we can wait for the spontaneous onset of labor. If she doesn't get into labor after 40 weeks, then we have to do fetal surveillance test to know the fetal well-being. These tests are daily fetal movement count, NST, biophysical profile, CST, etc., which we will discuss later. And usually we consider induction if the woman goes 40 plus 3 days, so that she will deliver within 41 weeks. And the method of induction depends on the Bishop score of the cervix. We have already done an assessment of the cervix and calculated the Bishop score. And if the Bishop score is less than 3, we use a mechanical induction, that is Follis plus extra amniotic saline. If it is between 3 and 6, we can consider prostaglandin E1 for induction of labor. If it is more than 6, it is considered to be a favorable cervix. We can do induction by doing a artificial rupture of membrane and pitocin or both. Once the woman gets into labor, it may be either a spontaneous onset or maybe due to induction. You should be able to diagnose whether it is true labor, and if she is in true labor, what is the stage of labor she is in. So, true labor is diagnosed when the pain is associated with the uterine contraction and cervical dilatation. And the cervical dilatation is evidenced by the show, which is a serosanguinous discharge expelled from the cervix. And if she is in true labor, then you have to see in which stage of labor she is in. Labor is divided into first stage, second stage and third stage. First stage, from beginning of true labor pain up to 10 cm cervical dilatation or full dilatation of the cervix. Second stage, from full dilatation of cervix to the expulsion of the fetus or fetuses. Third stage, after the expulsion of the fetus to the separation and expulsion of the placenta and contraction and retraction of the uterus. First stage is again divided into latent stage of labor and active stage of labor. Patients, when the cervix is dilated less than 4 cm, we call it is a latent stage of labor, and when it is 4 cm or more, then we say the woman is in active stage of labor. When the patient is in active labor, you have to start a chart a partogram. And the monitoring you do in a laboring patient is you have to look for uterine contraction, whether it is adequate or not. When there are more than 3 to 5 contractions in 10 minutes, each contraction lasting for 45 to 60 seconds, we say there is adequate uterine contraction. And you have to look for the fetal heart rate. It should be between 110 and 160, and there should not be any deceleration like late deceleration or variable deceleration, which indicate fetal distress. The monitoring should be done every half an hour in the first stage, and the fetal heart rate should be monitored every half an hour in the first stage and every 15 minutes after rupture of membrane, and every 5 minutes or ideally after every contraction in the second stage. You should also look for whether the labor is progressing or not. Frequently, the increasing strength of the uterine contraction, more frequent uterine contraction, and there will be progressive descent of the head into the pelvis, and the location of the fetal heart will be coming to lower and lower part of the abdomen. All these indicate the labor is progressing well, which can be confirmed by a vaginal examination every 4 hourly. When the cervix reaches full dilatation and the woman entering into second stage, the character of labor pain will change. In the first stage, the pain will be felt in the lower back and the lower abdomen. In the second stage, pain will be more felt in the around the inner thigh and the vulva, and there will be the pain will be of more of a strain. The woman may start to push, and you can see the anus is dilating and the vulva will be gaping, and you can see the fetal hair at the introitus. When there is crowning, that is, the fetal scalp is visible in between uterine contraction at the vulval introitus, then we say it is crowning, and this is the time to transfer her to the second stage of labor room, and the woman is put in the dorsal position, clean and draped. The doctor also put on aseptic sterile, take the aseptic precautions, put on sterile gloves, goggles, mask and a sterile apron. Now the doctor is ready to conduct the delivery. You can give a episiotomy. We give a right medial lateral episiotomy, and the area should be infiltrated with the local anesthesia. We use 1 to 2% lignocaine, about 5 to 10 ml. The head should be delivered slowly so that to prevent any perineal injury. You have to give support to the perineum and allowing the head to deliver ideally in between uterine contraction, which will prevent sudden extension of the head and prevent perineal injury. When the head is born, wipe the mouth and nostril of any secretions, wait for restitution and external rotation, and after that the posterior shoulder will be delivered first, followed by the anterior shoulder, and the rest of the body will be slipping down. After the delivery, if the baby is taking breath and actively crying, there is no hurry. You can wait for the cord pulsation to cease, or at least wait for 1 minute, and you can clamp the cord. Put 2 clamps, one on the mother side, other on the fetal side, and cut the cord in between clamps, and give the baby to the pediatrician. Now, this is the third stage, which is the most important stage where complication can occur. So, the most important complication is postpartum hemorrhage. To prevent that, we practice active management of third stage. We should be able to name the investigation done in a normal pregnancy, and depending upon the trimester, the investigation may vary, but all these investigations should be done in a patient if she comes first in the first visit. At the first visit, you should check the hemoglobin to rule out anemia, and the normal level of hemoglobin is greater than or equal to 11 gram percentage. We should do a blood grouping and RH typing. Every woman should be screened for diabetes in the first trimester to rule out overt diabetes. So diabetes is diagnosed when the fasting blood sugar is greater than 126 milligram percentage, or the glycosylated hemoglobin is more than or equal to 6.5 percentage, or a random blood sugar value is more than or equal to 200 milligram percentage. But you can do either of the three. But if an RBS is done, you have to substantiate it by either fasting blood sugar or glycosylated hemoglobin. It is also routine for us to screen for thyroid disorders, and we usually do the TSH, and it should be less than 3 international units per deciliter. We also do screen the woman for certain diseases like HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, syphilis, and the aim is to prevent vertical transmission by treating the mother, and it should be all negative in a normal patient. Urine should be examined for albumin, sugar, microscopy, and a culture and sensitivity should also be done to rule out asymptomatic bacteriuria. When there is a colony count of more than 1 lakh per ml without any urinary symptoms, we call it as asymptomatic bacteriuria. An ultrasound also should be done between 11 to 13 weeks to look for the nuchal translucency. Normally, it should be less than 3 millimeter. If it is more than, that is abnormal, and that may be indicative of a Down syndrome or other anomalies. In the second trimester, you have to do an anomaly scan at 16 to 18 weeks, and at 24 to 28 weeks, a GTT should be done, provided she is not detected to be diabetic in the first trimester. And the GTT is done with the 75 gram glucose, and you should know the normal values. Normally, the fasting blood sugar should be less than 92, 1 hour value less than 180, and 2 hour value less than 153. If any of the values are greater than the mentioned value, then we can say she is having a gestational diabetes. It is also better to repeat the hemoglobin in the second trimester. In the third trimester, if the diabetes is not detected so far, we can repeat the GTT after 4 weeks between 36 weeks. And the USG may also be done if indicated after 34 weeks to roll out IUGR, to know the locate the placenta, or to confirm the presentation. USG in the third trimester is not a must. If Fetal well-being tests are done when in a high-risk pregnancy or when the fetus shows some risk factor. It is not usually done in a low-risk pregnancy, but if it goes past date, that is an indication for initiating fetal surveillance. The easy and simplest test is daily fetal movement count by the mother. She can count the fetal movements at least 3 hours, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, and 1 hour in the evening. At least 3 movements per hour. That is altogether 10 movements in a 12-hour period. Or you can also ask her to count till she gets 10 movements. And if she is less than 3 per hour, she has to report. The fetal movement count is not reliable. There is a high false positive and false negative. So the next test is the non-stress test, where we record the fetal heart rate electronically using a cardiotocogram. And the observation period is 20 minutes. And in this 20-minute interval, there should be at least 2 acceleration associated with the fetal movement. And each acceleration should be 15 beats above the baseline and lasting for more than 15 seconds above the baseline. It should be, and there should be at least 2 such accelerations. Then we say the NST is reactive, and you can assure the fetal well-being for 48 hours. That means the NST should be repeated every 3rd day. If the NST is, if this criteria is not met, we say it is a non-reactive NST. Then you have to assure the well-being by other tests. And the next test is the biophysical profile. Here, using an ultrasound, we look for the parameters. The 5 parameters we look for are NST, gross body movement, tone, then the respiratory movement, and the amniotic fluid index. For each parameter, you give a score of 1 or score of 0 or 2. There is no one intermediate score. So in a 30-minute observation period, there should be at least 1 gross body movement. Then you give a score of 2. If there is no movement, score of 0. Tone is looked for by looking at the flexion and extension movement of the spine, or the opening and closing of the limbs, upper limbs. At least 1 movement should be there. Then the score is 2. If there is no movement, you can say it is a score of 0. And the respiration, at least 1 episode of respiratory movement should be there in a 30-minute observation period. Then you can give a score of 2. If there is no respiratory movement, score 0. Then we have to look for the NST. If reactive, we have a score of 2. If it is non-reactive, score of 0. Then amniotic fluid index is calculated by measuring the vertical pocket of amniotic fluid on 4 quadrants of the abdomen and adding up. If the normal amniotic fluid index is between 5 to 15. If it is less than 5, we call it as a oligomnios, and the score is 0. If it is normal, we give a score of 2. Then you have to add up the score. If the score is 8 or more, we call the baby, we presume the baby is well. If it is less than 4, then the baby may be in jeopardy. In women with fetal showing evidence suspicious of IUGR, you can use a Doppler ultrasound to confirm IUGR, where you measure the velocity of blood flow in the umbilical artery, where it may show increased resistance or decrease in the diastolic flow. Then that is how you diagnose IUGR. And Doppler can also help you to monitor the IUGR baby, and it will tell you when to terminate the pregnancy. The pregnancy is terminated when the Doppler show either absence of diastolic flow or reversal of end diastolic flow. CST or contraction stress test is done only if you have decided to terminate the pregnancy, because if you do the test, there is a chance the woman may go into labor. It usually done to know whether the patient, whether the fetus is compromised and will withstand the stress of labor. That is, as a preliminary to induction of labor. Here, we make the uterus to contract either by oxytocin or by nipple stimulation. And once there are adequate uterine contraction, we do a fetal heart tracing using a CTG and look for any late deceleration. If there are late deceleration with more than 50% of the contraction, then we say the CST is positive. If there are no decelerations, then we call the CST is negative. A positive CST indicates that the fetus is having hypoxia and it may not withstand the stress of labor. If it is a negative CST, that means the baby is well. Sometimes there may be occasional deceleration with some contraction, but it may not be present with the 50% of the contraction. Then we say it is a suspicious CST. Then we have to repeat the test. If you fail to elicit any uterine contraction, then you cannot comment on the test. Then it is called an indeterminate. Remember, CST is not done routinely, only if you decide to terminate the pregnancy, because one of the complications is PROM and the patient may go into labor. A pelvic examination is mandatory before deciding on the route of delivery. And pelvic examination is indicated in near term, that is after 38 weeks completed. And presence of placenta previa is an absolute contraindication for pelvic examination. And one complication of pelvic examination is it can introduce infection if you are not careful. So you have to practice aseptic precautions before doing a vaginal examination, and it should be done only if it is indicated. The purpose of vaginal examination are assessment of the cervix, assessment of the pelvis, assessment of CPD. We will go in details one by one. Before pelvic examination, the woman is asked to empty the bladder and bowel. The woman is kept in the dorsal position with the knees bent, and the examiner puts sterile gloves and stand on the right side of the patient. Introduce the index and middle finger of the right hand into the vagina. The first thing we during a vaginal examination is to assess the cervix. Assessment of the cervix will tell you whether the patient is in labor, and it will also tell you which inducing agent to be used in case she needed induction. During assessment of the cervix, we look for the position of the cervix, consistency of the cervix, length of the cervix, and dilatation of the cervix, and station of the presenting part, and give score for each parameter 0, 1, 2 as shown in the table, and the score is added up, and if the Bishop score is less than 3, we say it is a very unfavorable cervix, and if it is between 3 and 6, still unfavorable, and more than 6, it is a favorable cervix. Coming to the assessment of the pelvis, the purpose is to know whether there is any abnormality of the pelvis and whether it is sufficient, the dimensions of the pelvis is sufficient for the passage of the baby. The normal female pelvis is a gynecoid pelvis, and the character of a gynecoid pelvis are the sacrum, promontory, the sacrum is well curved, the greater sciatic notch is wider, side walls are parallel or diverging, the subpubic angle should be obtuse, and the outlet should be wider. So how to assess these characters? You introduce your right index and middle finger into the vagina under aseptic precautions. You can use some antiseptic cream for lubrication and to avoid any infection. And the first thing you will do is try to palpate the sacral promontory. In a normal gynecoid pelvis, sacral promontory cannot be palpated. If it is palpated, that means there can be the anteroposterior diameter may be less than normal. After palpating for the sacral promontory, you palpate the sacrum to know whether it is well curved from above downwards and side to side. In a well curved sacrum, the upper vertebra of the sacrum will not be palpable. You can palpate only the lower 1 or 2 vertebrae. And after palpating the sacrum, you come to the pelvic side wall and locate the ischial spine. The spine should not be should not be unduly prominent. It should not be jetting into the cavity. Then you have to know whether the sacral greater sciatic notch is wider or not. And it is a sacrospinous ligament which bridge the gap between the greater sciatic notch. So you can place your hand between the sacrum and the ischial spine. That is the place of the sacrospinous ligament, and it should be accommodating 2 fingers, which will tell you that the greater sciatic notch is wider. Now we palpate the pelvic side wall. It should be parallel or diverging. It should not be converging. Now we have to look for the subpubic angle. It should be accommodating 2 fingers comfortably, which tells you the subpubic angle is obtuse. Then you have to assess the pelvic outlet, that is the intertuberous diameter between the 2 ischial tuberosities. You will be able to admit 4 knuckles. So these are the normal diameter of a gynecoid pelvis. Then in case the sacral promontory is palpable, then you have to measure the diagonal conjugate before taking your hand out of the pelvis. from the middle of the sacrum to the lower border of the symphysis pubis. It is marked on your finger and measured. If it is less than 12 centimeter, 12.5, that means it is a anteroposteriorly contracted pelvis at the brim. During vaginal examination, you also have to roll out cephalopelvic disproportion. It is a relative term, but it can occur when the baby is large and the pelvis is normal, or the pelvis can be average but the baby is normal but the pelvis can be average. So it is only the relative size of the fetus and the pelvis. How to assess CPD? There are different methods, and the most common used method is Mandraker-Muller method and Hillis-Muller method. For this, you introduce your right index and middle finger into the vagina and keep the thumb of the right hand over the symphysis pubis. With the left hand, catch hold of the head of the fetus suprapubically and push it in the direction of the pelvic cavity, that is downward and backward. If it goes into the pelvic cavity or is it flushing with the thumb or overriding the thumb. If there is overriding, it is a major degree CPD. Flushing with the thumb, it is a minor degree CPD. If the head goes into the pelvic cavity, then with your vaginal finger kept at the level of the ischial spine, feel that the head is coming and touching your hand kept at the zero station. Then you can say there is no CPD. If it is not coming into the pelvic cavity up to the ischial spine, there is a minor degree CPD. Mandraker-Muller test has high false positive for CPD. This is because we are usually doing it before labor and where the cervix may be unfavorable. So you may not be able to push down the head. So to avoid that, you can, and it is difficult to push the head catching it at the suprapubic region. So to obviate these difficulties and to reduce the false positive of Mandraker-Muller method, we have the Hillis-Muller method, where the difference is instead of giving a suprapubic pressure, here you give a fundal pressure, which is more easier. And again, the test is done when the patient is in active labor, which will reduce the false positive. When we talk about induction of labor, you should know what are the agents used for induction, how to choose between them, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of these inducing agents. The induction agent is chosen depending upon the favorability of the cervix. If the Bishop score is less than 3, we say it is a very unfavorable cervix. Then we use mechanical induction. The more common mechanical induction used is Foley's catheter and installation of extra-amniotic saline, and it is kept for 12 to 24 hours. So the advantage is it will cause slow dilatation of the cervix, and it is more successful in an unfavorable cervix. But the disadvantage is you are keeping a foreign body for 12 to 24 hours, that means it will invite infection. When the Bishop score is between 3 and 6, the chosen agent for induction is prostaglandin. There are two types of prostaglandin E1 and E2. we commonly use prostaglandin E1, which is available as a tablet form and is cheaper. Prostaglandin E1 can be given vaginally or can be given orally. If you choose the vaginal route, the dose is 25 microgram to be repeated every 4 hours for 3 doses. If you are using an oral route, you can give 50 microgram again 4th hourly and the maximum is 3 doses. Prostaglandin is a potent drug. It can cause tachysystoly, that is more than 5 contractions in 10 minutes, and it is absolutely contraindicated in case of a scarred uterus, like a case of previous cesarean, which can cause rupture uterus. Another prostaglandin commonly used is the prostaglandin E2, which is available in a gel form, a dinoprostone gel, and the dose is 250 microgram, is introduced into the posterior fornix, can be repeated 6 to 12 hours apart, and we usually use 2 doses. It can also produce tachysystoly and is contraindicated in a scarred uterus. Other minor side effects of prostaglandin are there can be allergy to prostaglandin, there can be nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, etc. When the Bishop score is more than 6, we say it is a favorable service. Then we can use either oxytocin, which is a weak inducing agent, or you can have a surgical induction, that is artificial rupture of the membrane. The complications for artificial rupture of membrane or ARM can produce cord prolapse, can produce infection, rarely can also cause abruption, and there is no going back once you do a ARM. You have to continue the labor and have to terminate the pregnancy. Most often we begin on different methods. We begin with a mechanical induction, then give prostaglandins, and maybe oxytocin may be used for acceleration. So all these methods can be combined. Oxytocin is a weak drug for induction. It is mainly used as an accelerating agent, or it can be for induction. It can be used for a favorable service, that is the Bishop score is more than 6. The disadvantage of oxytocin is it should be given as a continuous drip, and we usually add 5 units to a 500 ml saline, and it is started as a small increment like 6 drops per minute, gradually increasing by 4 to 6 drops until we reach a 60 drops per minute. The complications that can occur are it can produce tachysystoly, and it also occasion, if not titrated, can given in a titrated dose can even produce rupture uterus. The advantage of oxytocin is the half-life of oxytocin is about 2 to 3 minutes. So once you stop the drug, the action will be immediately stopped.